Hey, it's the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast coming at you. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's John Sheeran, coming at you at a little different day and time, 4 o'clock Eastern on Thursday for the live viewers. Thank you for adjusting and joining us if you are so inclined, and if not, well, we're kind of playing some jazz with the schedules and whatnot right now, and getting things set up for the offseason. John, how are you, bud?
It's the off season. There's no rules, man. We can do whatever we want. There's no games being played on Sundays. It's
That's
up
what
to
I said, playing jazz, man.
It's up to whenever these teams decide to make decisions on things that are of minor importance, like maybe a quarterback extension here and there. We'll just go with the flow.
Well, we talked about some of the, happenings, not happenings around the league, AFC. Obviously, a lot to watch and monitor with the Baltimore Ravens and what's going on with Lamar Jackson there. There's talk about, are they going to get a deal done? Are they going to do the franchise tag? Is this, what's going on now that they've got a new offensive coordinator? So that's a big deal that everybody's kind of keeping an eye on, as was the head coaching hires across the NFL. And we talked about that the other day on kind of the news update that we provided everybody. It almost seemed, John, that it was Anarumo's job in Arizona. It kind of felt like, he was kind of the guy that they had narrowed it down to. And then there was kind of a late addition, it seemed, with the offensive coordinator from the Eagles who ended up getting the job. And now the Bengals are able to keep Dan Pitcher, who interviewed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for an offensive coordinator position. You got Brian Callahan, who interviewed for the Colts and had some other interest out there. And then, of course, you had Anarumo getting down to the wire with the Cardinals, but the Bengals are able to retain all of those. Talked a little bit about that the other day, but I'd love to get your thoughts on those guys all coming back, what it means to the Bengals from a macro perspective, I suppose.
Look, credit to the Cardinals for kind of sticking to their guns. Like, it seemed like Gannon was always like the under the radar type of candidate that we didn't hear that much about, just because he had been spending so much time, preparing for the Super Bowl, and then he ended up in Arizona for practicing and then playing in the stadium that he's now supposedly going to be coaching for the next 5 or 6 years. So credit to them for not, using the Super Bowl like against him. I'm sure it obviously came up in the interview, but I wouldn't want that bad juju on my conscience if I was making that hire. So credit to them for actually sticking to it. But yeah, it did seem like after the Super Bowl, Lou Anarumo was one of the final 2 candidates there. They seemed to be going in that defensive direction. It seemed like he had the inside track, but they must have been in on Gannon this whole time. I think there was a relationship already established between him and the GM there, and it seemed like that was the best or the most likely chance that the Bengals coach is going to get hired away to another team. But here we are, the entire staff is kind of back together, man. And honestly, it kind of feels like people, at least from GMs and owners, they view the Bengals in the same way as almost the Chiefs now, where it's like Brian Callahan, Lou Anarumo, they will be future head coaches. I have no doubt in my mind one day. But I feel the same way about Eric Bieniemy, right? And Eric Bieniemy is now like 20 interviews deep in his career. He still hasn't been hired as a head coach. He's now garnering interest from the Washington Commanders to lead their offense. And it seems like the only way that Bieniemy, in this case, can be hired as a head coach is if he gets away from Patrick Mahomes, because people view the Chiefs as like Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. They are the 2 biggest and most important catalysts, obviously, for making that thing go. And it's almost like, at least from my perspective, like Lou Anarumo, Brian Callahan, they should be garnering more interest to be head coaches, and they're not. And it's like Joe Burrow has succeeded so much beyond a lot of people's expectations in Cincinnati that people are kind of just viewing the Bengals uprise as almost entirely because of Joe Burrow. And it feels like the coaches aren't getting enough credit because of that. Just like Patrick Mahomes is obviously the reason why people think that the Chiefs and Andy Reid are as good as they are, and Bieniemy kind of gets left out into the cold. So I hope that doesn't last eternally for both Callahan and Anarumo, because I want the best for both of them. But it does seem like... Yeah. Right, like it just seems like it's trending that sort of way, and until like I guess a team is desperate enough or has gone through exhausted all through their options, then Callahan and Anarumo are kind of here to stay, just because like maybe that's just the perception of the Bengals right now.
Maybe it is the perception of the Bengals, and it's kind of tough to be a defensive coordinator in the NFL right now if you're successful and you want to get a head coaching job, because it seems as if everything revolves around those offensive minds. You even look at what Denver did. They moved off of an unproven offensive mind and went to a proven offensive mind, and Sean Payton as their next head coach. You look around, it's not defensive coordinator heavy around the league. It just seems like these younger offensive minds, kind of the innovative approaches, they win the day when it comes down to whittling down candidates and getting guys that get in there. So, I mean, tough break for Lou Anarumo. I mean, it was the same thing with Mike Zimmer for a long time. And I don't know what else, guys. I mean, I guess it's an interesting parallel you bring up between Bieniemy, Callahan, and whatnot. I think it's not only the quarterback head coach combo, but it's also, they're not the sole play caller type of stigma, I think, that goes with that as well. We know Callahan's part of a brain trust. Bieniemy, obviously part of a brain trust there, but a lot of stuff flows through Reed and Mahomes in terms of what they do there. So I think there's a little bit of hesitancy from teams in that regard, saying, how heavy are the responsibilities that you actually have? I assume that's brought up quite a bit in the interview process when they talk to these guys, right? I mean, you have to figure that's going to be brought up. But hey, other teams' losses, I guess, or the Bengals' gains, or other teams' passes on these coaches, the Bengals' gain. And this is one of the things I know it didn't go as well as we had hoped in this stretch, 2011 through 2015. But that was one of the reasons, a big reason why the Bengals were so successful. Continuity for the most part. Yeah, you lost, you ended up losing Zimmer. You kind of had to go through a couple of offensive coordinators, but even the guys that, when Jay Gruden got replaced, you had Hugh Jackson, who was in that system, so there's a lot of continuity there, even when guys left. And here we are now with the Bengals, same thing going on.
Yeah, and obviously when that whole thing was going down, when they lost both coordinators after the 2013 season, which hasn't happened until it is now happening for the Eagles after they just went to the Super Bowl, guys jumped at the chance to become head coaches. They jumped at the chance for these promotions. Both of Andy Dalton's first two coordinators eventually became head coaches because Dalton had such success under them, and teams wanted to replicate that for their teams. It's almost a sign of respect now that the Bengals had this unparalleled level of continuity that really only the Chiefs can kind of match from a coordinator standpoint. But you also include Dan Pitcher, the quarterback's coach, who has major influence on the architecture and the design of the offense. Troy Walters can kind of say the same, and he was also being targeted as an offense coordinator for the Houston Texans. The fact that all these guys are now coming back and the level of interest that they're garnering, it's almost like the NFL is viewing it as, this is something that really works for them. And it's just kind of like the perfect storm of minds coming together to really build this thing. Because like we've seen in the past, teams rising from the literal bottom of the barrel like the Bengals to where they are now, like those teams end up having to go through coaching turnover, and the Bengals just aren't in that boat. It's very fascinating to see.
It is. So we're going to get to hopefully a couple of prospect profiles, at least one. NFL draft prospect profiles. We'll get to those towards the end of the show, but we want to talk about the coaching and then maybe what we think a little bit of what the Bengals approach will be with free agency, the draft, et cetera. So now let's just kind of look at what this means here for the Bengals with the coaching returns. I mean, obviously you would think that based on the success, based on a lot of the quotes that a lot of players have made, particularly on that defensive side of the ball, you would think that Callahan, Pitcher, and Rumo coming back, big positive for this team. Bengals have some pretty big free agents on the defensive side of the ball in particular. Obviously, contract extensions on the horizon on the offensive side of the ball also to weigh out here. But we had an interesting report from Field Yates of ESPN. He's kind of lone wolfing this thing where he feels like Jesse Bates may actually have a decent chance at coming back to the Bengals. We've spent the better part, I guess, now of almost 2 full years, right? Year and a half, something like that now, saying probably not going to happen, long-term extension. But here you go. You got the defensive coordinator back, which maybe a lot of people didn't figure that would happen. And so now, I mean, are we looking at the Bengals? How much of a percentage, I guess, better, if you want to put a number on it, or just how big is this for the Bengals to potentially retain some of their premier players setting to hit free agency? When you get a guy like Anarumo back, you get the offensive staff back.
I think Bates is still like 1%. Like, honestly, his market may not be exactly what he wants, but I promise you he's going to find a deal that's better, more lucrative in the ways that he wants outside of Cincinnati. Like, I'm sure the offer is still on the table. I don't think anything is set in stone for what their plan is at safety. They drafted Dax Hill, obviously, to replace one of Jesse Bates or Von Bell. I can't imagine, obviously, both of those veterans are going to be back. So Dax is going to be a starter. He's versatile enough where he can play both spots. So in the reality where Jesse Bates does resign, then Dax Hill would just take Von Bell's spot. But I think most people are kind of in the boat that Dax is going to replace Jesse just because there's a higher chance, a significantly higher chance that Jesse is gone, just because he knows what he wants to be paid at. Like, I'm sure he has an idea of what the market is out there. He has an agent that is notorious for getting the absolute most bang for his client's buck and everything that kind of goes with that. Bates is younger than Von Bell. He's got more perceived upside. He has a skill set that is probably higher valued when it comes to what other GMs look for. And, there was probably interest, sometime last year before free agency began, there was the tag there. Like, I'm sure teams were really desperate to get their hands on Jesse Bates, and now he's 1 year more experience. He had another decent year. I guess not a dominant year in the ways that maybe Bengals fans would have wanted, but certainly not bad enough where he completely tanked his market. Like, I don't see a situation where he just finds absolutely nowhere close to what he wants, and then he comes crawling back to the Bengals.
Yeah, I mean, last year to me he was far more consistent throughout the year last year than he was the year prior. Last year, in 2021, I should say, Bates really shined in the postseason. It was kind of an up and down year in the regular season. This year felt like a much more steady year from him across the board, and even in the postseason too. So, I think he's going to get big value. I don't know that I necessarily, agree with what Field Yates said, but maybe there is an uptick a little bit saying, hey, the coach that I've been performing very well under is back. This unit that's been performing very, very well under Lou Anarumo is, he's back spearheading the thing, and we don't have to kind of rebuild. And it looks like a lot of pieces are in place for another deep run. Maybe that's appealing if the Bengals put something out there that is at least close to what he is seeking. I don't know. Again, kind of to what you hinted at here, I don't see the needle moving all that much for him specifically, but I think there are some others that would be maybe more tempted to come back, maybe tempted to extend because of the return there. So Bates is kind of the big question mark. I just thought it was very interesting that Field Yates kind of put that out there. A guy who's got a pretty good pulse on things around the league.
I mean, I can't imagine what his sources are. Like, I don't know if that was based on anything that he heard or is his gut or just what he's heard from other agents or whatnot. There's nothing that has changed necessarily. Like, I understand the angle of Anarumo coming back and these guys loving to play under him. Logan Wilson, I think, texted Jeff Hobson the other day. Like, I'm selfishly ecstatic that Lou is coming back just because the system, it benefits the players so much, and there's a lot of excitement to remain in the same system that they all know and love and thrive under. So that's definitely a factor to some extent. But like Bates has been on the record for saying, like, the difference between $10 million is something that he can't necessarily ignore.
Right.
Whether or not that applies to other players, like for example, like Jermaine Pratt, right? Like, he's also made it very vocal that he wants a more expanded role and he wants to maximize his potential earnings. The variable of Anarumo coming back may or may not impact that, but again, like these players, they only get one or two chances at most to maximize whatever they can earn. And for especially a player like Pratt, who really dominated in a contract year and really elevated himself at the perfect right time. Like, this is the chance for him to realize a maximized role on a maximized contract, potentially on another team aside from the Bengals. And that's his prerogative to go out and chase that. And that's his prerogative to do that outside of this specific scheme. I'm sure there's definitely interest for him to return, but I don't think the Bengals are going to adjust their price knowing, like, regardless of what happens at defensive coordinator. Now Lou Anarumo's back. Maybe they think that they can get these guys at somewhat of a discount, but I don't think it impacts the players that much, I guess.
Well, we're going to switch gears here, and we're going to go a little bit in terms of NFL chronological order from their calendar perspective. Now that the Bengals coaches are back, and think there's going to be a lot of cohesion and aligned vision in terms of, hey, this is how we're going to go through the scouting process. This is what we're going to do for the free agency process, et cetera. So free agency obviously kicks off before the draft, although scouting season is underway. With these guys back, and with the affirmation, we already went last week. We went through the litany of all the impending free agents, and there's some big names in there for the Cincinnati Bengals of their own guys, that is. So there's this sentiment now, John, where you go, okay, look, Burrow, the whole crew on offense, you can add some pieces, free agency, the draft, maybe you make one or two big splashes in free agency outside. You retain some of the key guys inside, because this window, as you have all these coaches together, continues to be jammed up open. I know Burrow said it's his whole career, but this window continues to be propped open because this coaching staff that is shown to be successful is back together. So I guess as you sit here right now, we're about a month or so away from the kickoff of the big frenzy that is free agency. As you sit here right now, coaching staff back intact, we know about the extensions and whatnot, and that's the other portion of this to weigh. Extensions coming up for big players, re-signing internal free agents, obviously a pretty big priority of this team. But do you see this kind of, hey, this might be another all-in type of offseason, let's spend a little more than we normal, or than we have, or than we did in the early, the first year of Zach Taylor, some of the years in Marvin Lewis, let's spend more then, even though we've got the roster in arguably the best shape it's been, because we got our coaching staff back and we've got all hands on deck.
I don't think the Bengals will ever go completely all in, like maybe the Philadelphia Eagles are a good example of that this past year, right? When they made multiple moves at the trade deadline, when they just stacked the roster as much as possible because they realized the window that they were in. They realized the quarterback that they had on that kind of deal. I don't think the Bengals will ever quite do that, because that also is kind of reflected in the draft, and the Bengals continue to have the same philosophies when it comes to the draft. They like to look at least at another year ahead. That's what they did this past season. I think where you will see them maybe be more aggressive is just in making sure that Burrow and maybe to an extent Higgins are back. Maybe they are a little bit more aggressive, or at least for Burrow. There's just no scenario where I see him not signing the extension this year, and that may lead to them crossing over to the fence a little bit and having a little bit more wiggle room in the extension. And maybe that's the case for Higgins as well. They saved a lot of cash this past year knowing what was on the doorstep for this year. I think they were 30th in cash spending last free agency, despite going out and getting Alex Kappa, Ted Karras the minute free agency began, and then Lyle Collins a week later, right? They structured those deals in a way where they didn't have to spend that much cash up front for that specific year, knowing that they needed as much in the reserve bank as possible for this year. And I think that's where you will see obviously more aggression. You'll see both of those extensions, if both happen, look completely different compared to what past extensions have been with the Bengals, just because of the guaranteed money factor, just because of having to have that cash on hand up front that is paid to them immediately, and that will be the bulk of these extensions, right? So despite the amount of salary cap space that they have, I don't think you will see them targeting tier one free agents right out of the gate, knowing that their priorities are to retain these guys and to sustain what they have instead of trying to rebuild certain areas of the roster.
Yeah, there's not much to rebuild depending on what happens with some of these internal guys, but I mean the cupboard's going to be kind of bare potentially at safety, potentially at tight end. So those are areas you're probably going to look at them addressing. One of those positions, if all goes according to plan, we'll talk about in terms of a draft profile here in just a second. But I mean, I don't see. I guess what I'm referencing is, are you seeing a 2020 off season type of thing where you've got the DJ Readers and these big Trey Waynes and these big, we know what happened there, but these big kind of moves where you go, okay, wow, this is now that you got the coaching staff, that's that one or two pieces that you may thought you were missing this last year that maybe could have put you over the hump here. That's kind of what I'm thinking. I do think while they may make some mid-tier moves, maybe, if you're going to grade the tiers, I guess I would say maybe B, but I would say probably C tier type of moves for some players. I do think that this is going to be an internally focused offseason for the Bengals, keeping Von Bell, maybe seeing what, if anything, can be done with Jesse Bates and keeping him around, shoring up the offensive line, making sure the guys are healthy there. And then, of course, see what happens with Hurst, see what happens with a number of different positions here. But I think they feel that they've got the coaching staff, they've got the quarterback, they've got the weapons on offense. Now they just got to kind of tinker things, bring some key players back, and work it that way. Now, might they see someone out there, or might someone be dangled for a trade out there that tempts them? Perhaps. But I think, I don't want to call it a boring offseason, but I think this is going to be one of those kind of, I hate to say it, a little bit one of those old school Marvin Lewis free agency periods where it's bring all the guys back you've had success with, that their contracts are expiring, get set to extend some of your key players whose contracts are coming up here in the horizon, and that's probably going to be the focus, and sprinkle in a couple of outside guys here and there.
Well, look at what openings are available on the roster right now, just looking at free agents. Like, you have 4 starting jobs that are open right now. One of them is going to be filled by Dax Hill. One of them is going to be filled by Cam Taylor-Britt. And then you have, I guess, linebacker with Jermaine Pratt and tight end with Hayden Hurst. A lot of people love this tight end class. And what happens every year, no matter what the position is, if it's a strong draft class, then that definitely impacts what those players at that position can get on the open market, which doesn't mean great news for Hayden Hurst and maybe some other, mid-tier tight end free agents. Like, their entire tight end group is completely up for sale at this point. Like, they have no one under contract. They can completely remake that the way that they want to, and they have a great draft class to do that. So that eliminates probably big money at that position. The Bengals never really pay big money at any linebacker spot, really, aside from Vontaze Burfict. And if they're going to pay a linebacker, we can kind of guess at this point it's going to be Logan Wilson, just because they already play him like a 3-down line. He never comes off the field, right? They value him probably more than Jermaine Pratt at this point, despite the season that Jermaine Pratt had. So you look at these roster openings, there's not glaring holes necessarily at offensive line, albeit, both tackle spots maybe could be upgraded, but it's not like they absolutely need elite new bodies there like they did last year. Yeah. There's not really any spot on the roster like that, so there's no there's no need for them to be so aggressive in getting one of these tier 1 guys immediately like they have been in the past couple of years. Now, the difference may be fans may want them to be aggressive in attacking like offensive tackle or maybe another edge rusher right out of the gate, right? But in their mind, they see all of these major spots already filled, and if they're not already filled, they're going to be replaced by guys that they already have on the roster. So yeah, like you said, a lot of depth signings, a lot of guys in the second, third waves of the free agency, and what matters more than anything is those are quality players. Like, you don't want bad retread players over the age of 30 like we saw in the Marvin Lewis years. Like, this team still has an identity in targeting, guys still in the prime of their careers, and maybe guys that maybe feel slighted by what they did or didn't get in the open market. And now they see a team who's on the verge of winning an NFL championship. Like, this is a great opportunity to really boost your career on like a 1-year deal. I think that is definitely more of an intriguing path now that they have 2 years of sustained success.
That's a really interesting point that you bring up about in Marvin Lewis. When Marvin Lewis was here, there were big names that were brought over, especially early in the free agency periods, but there were big names that were brought over, but they were on like their 4th contract, their 3rd contract, a 1-year rental deal. We're talking AJ Hawk. We're talking Sam Adams. We're talking all these guys towards
Carlos
the very
Dansby.
End of their career. You had the name, but they were at the end of Dansby was like, they tried to get him a couple of years before they ended up actually getting him. And so you look at that, and now the interesting thing about Zach Taylor's compared to Marvin Lewis in that approach, it's really great that you brought that up, is they are targeting guys that are really in their looking at their second contract, maybe their third, but their second contract usually. And those are guys that are right in the prime of their careers, and guys that maybe are still ascending players, as opposed to, you're talking about some of the others that were on the backside of their career and maybe have 1 foot out of the NFL door, so to speak.
Yeah, it matters more than just what they're being paid, right? And of course, the guys that get paid the most are signed first, right? And I just think we both feel like that's not going to happen with the Bengals this year, but you can find quality talent, quality depth players, role players all throughout free agency, specifically after that first wave is done. And it's just going to be a return maybe to normalcy, I guess, for some Bengals fans before, 2020 and 2021, where they wait a little bit, they see how the market kind of settles. Maybe they have guys like Pratt and Bates leave into that tier 1 of free agency, and then they kind of work from there. And obviously, a lot of this is dependent on, can they get the Burrow deal done before this, because they have options plan A, plan B, plan C, based off of the timeline of this, right? Like, if Burrow doesn't get signed, then that maybe change that changes like how much cash they have on hand to potentially make some moves. But if Burrow does get signed, then that completely changes, what their flexibility is for this free agency. So a lot still has to be played out, especially with the internal guys that maybe they sign before free agency begins. But some of those guys like Pratt and Bates will definitely want to test the market for sure.
Well, we've talked a little free agency. We've talked about the coaches. We're going to get into the draft in just a second here, and we're going to start with, maybe where the team may be looking in terms of position, sides of the ball, that sort of thing in the draft. And then we've got a couple of player profiles for you. This is the Orange and Black Insider, part of the Cincy Jungle podcast channel, though. And that Cincy Jungle podcast channel can be found on your favorite audio streamer, whether that's iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, all of the major ones. We are there, so go check it out. You got to hit the subscribe button there. You can get our show, Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends. They had a really fun season, a very successful one in terms of fundraising for a number of different charities and whatnot. Very cool stuff. And then, of course, the great Matt Minnick doing his coach speak and chalk talk things for us there. So audio side, that's where we're at. And then video beneath John, underneath that Cincy Jungle icon there, you can hit our show logo, hit the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when new content is available, when we go live, all that good stuff. And of course, you got to keep it to cincyjungle.com for, yes, your podcast, but breaking news, opinions, analysis, all kinds of breakdowns, and a lot to come here in the next few weeks with free agency and the draft around the corner. No days off. Play like a champion. And Cincy Jungle does that for sure. Okay, well, let's move on, and then we'll get to some prospect profiles here in just a second. I guess I point back to where the coaches returning and whatnot with this question, John. But last year the Bengals went first 3 picks defense, right? You look at Hill and Taylor Britt and Zachary Carter. They needed that after kind of losing some guys and wanting to kind of bolster depth. Obviously, looking ahead, kind of using some foresight there. Obviously, 2020 was offensive heavy with Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, highlighting that class. So where do you see the Bengals as you sit here right now? Obviously, no free agency being, done at this point. But the coaches being back, where do you see the Bengals going? Because I assume, with these guys back, we have a little bit better grasp of, okay, these are the types of players they're going to target. These are the types of guys they're going to want, because we've become familiar with the coordinators and what this coaching staff likes to do.
You always got to play the classics, right? I mean, this team has trends in the draft that they typically, like, you can identify a position and you can correlate that to a round that they like to go to, and then you just look at what they need. I immediately look at offensive tackle, right? Obviously, there's question marks from a long-term perspective because Jonah Williams is up after this year. La'el Collins has 2 years left, but he's coming off of a torn ACL. You're not really sure what you have at that position regardless. I don't know if they're so aggressive to get an upgrade in free agency, and there's some complications with, I think, releasing La'el if he doesn't pass or regarding his physical and his injury. So I think that's just a position that they look at the draft. They've consistently targeted that position in the first and second rounds, sometimes both, albeit that didn't really work out in 2015 when they drafted Aboihi and Jake Fisher. But I immediately look at that. Cornerback is also another one that they target early. You have Eli Apple probably on the way out at this point. You have Cam Taylor-Britt, but you also have Chidobe Awuzie, who, again, coming off of a torn ACL entering the last year of his deal. You still have to look at this team like they're looking at the long term. They're trying to keep the window open as long as possible, and that doesn't mean to just attack your biggest needs immediately in the draft, because if that was the case and you cut Joe Mixon, then you would draft a running back in the first round, right? And I don't think that that's on the table for them, but running back is another spot where they could go round 2, round 3, round 4. It's a deep class. It seems like a good class. It seems like the most logical path forward to not pay Joe Mixon $10 million in base salary this year, just run with a rookie and maybe Samaje Perine. Linebacker potentially. I don't think it's going to be in the first 2 rounds. Like, 3rd round would be the earliest I would see if they want to replace Jermaine Pratt immediately, or look long term in case they don't get something done with Logan Wilson. So cornerback. Edge rusher as well. Like, I think they're always on the lookout for more bodies there. Like, they saw the impact that Joseph Asai made as that 3rd rusher in the draft, but they could always use more depth at both edge and 3 techniques. So really all across the board. And then tight end, right? They've drafted 2 tight ends in the first round in the past 10 years now. They have, again, complete freedom to redo that position group the way that they want to. It seems like a good class of tight ends too. So fortunately for them, some of these positions that they need either immediate or long-term depth, it seems like good classes for those positions.
So in the first round, usually the Bengals, depending on where they pick in the first round, but you're looking at cornerback is a position they really value in the first round when it's there. You look at wide receiver, particularly when they're picking in the top 10. In recent history, they really like to draft a premier or who they view as a premier wide receiver. Occasionally you'll see offensive tackle or an offensive lineman in there, but it really has to kind of make sense. The one that's kind of sticks out a little bit there is the Billy Price pick, because that was out of sheer desperation there, it seemed. But, you look at Jonah Williams recently as an offensive tackle. So those are usually the positions that they have, of course, quarterback when they've needed one of those as well. But those are the positions that they really tend to value pretty highly in that first round. Second round, you mentioned running back. Running back seems to be a pick that they make in those even rounds, whether it's 2, 4, or 6, right? Yeah. Second round, when they're looking for the starter, it seems like round 2 is the money round. Joe Mixon, Corey Dillon. I mean, you can Kenny Irons a long time ago. I mean, you could go on and on and on. Round 4 is where they found Rudy Johnson. I think that's where they found Curtis Keaton years ago. So I mean, they will go that route. I think P. Ryan himself, was he not a 4th round pick years ago as well?
Yep.
Not that he was picked by the Bengals, but he was a 4th round pick. And then, of course, when you look in round 6 and 7, Rodney Anderson, who was the kid from Baylor, Jay Finley, right? I mean, so there's guys back there that they draft, but I think rounds 2 and 4 particularly. And then when you look at round 4 is when they take those developmental trench guys, whether it's an interior defensive lineman, they really like that. Round 4 also seems to be where they get a project swing tackle type of guy that they think that they can develop. Round 3 seems to be those, big tools, not so much production edge players. All right. I mean, you look at, Jordan Willis and then Joseph Osai a couple of years ago. So, I mean, there are some themes there. I think Carl Lawson was a top of the 4th round pick, or, fringe 3rd round guy. So there are some themes positionally, like you said, that the Bengals tend to trend towards in the draft. And of course, what they also trend towards is best player available, particularly when they think their roster's in a pretty good spot as they do now. So right now, I know it's an easy thing to say. I see this at least positionally or sides of the ball they address in the draft. I see it being kind of a pretty balanced draft. I think they would, not that let's alternate offense, defense. They're not going to necessarily do that strategically, but I think, I don't think they're going to necessarily say, hey, we're going to only go offense early and then, defense be damned till the day 3 or whatever. I see it being pretty balanced.
Yeah. And I think it's been kind of the way it has been the past couple of years, just because free agency has kind of dictated how the draft was going to go. Like last year, they went all offensive line in free agency, and they didn't really address the defense in that phase of the offseason. So that's what they did in the draft. You can say in 2021, when they signed Hendrickson, they signed Awuzie, they signed Hilton and those guys, then they went offense. Yeah, they went offense back-to-back at the start of 2021, right, in the draft. So with free agency being kind of an unknown, you don't really know which positions they're going to aggressively target, if they're going to aggressively target any position. So there's probably going to be naturally more balance in this free agency period for them, aside from obviously retaining their own, which probably leads to a more balanced draft. And also, like, we can look at first round trends as well, but the Bengals don't normally draft this late in the first round as well. Like last year was the first time, it was the latest draft pick that I think they've ever had in NFL draft history, and they took a safety, right? Like we thought that safety was like a dark horse position that they could target in the first round, maybe towards the later part of the draft process, but we weren't probably expecting it when the draft began, right? Dax Hill just kind of fell into their laps. Everyone kind of declared the best player available, and they just went with that. They drafted Kevin Zeiler at the back half, at the very back of the first round, 11 years ago. They never take interior offensive linemen, or specifically guards, in the first round. But again, he was probably best player available. He fitted a need, and that's just what it was, right? So when you're drafting 28th or 29th or whatever they are this year, like I think anything kind of goes at that spot, and you could see like something like a tight end, right, where there's president, but you could also see another position, maybe like an edge rusher, maybe a defensive tackle. They haven't taken a defensive lineman in the first 2 rounds since I think Devin Still and Brandon Thompson, or I think it was Devin Still, the 2nd round pick in 2012.
3rd round was Thompson.
Or Marcus Hunt second round in 2013.
Yep.
So that was the last time they've taken a pass rusher that early. So that could be a trend that they break too. It all depends on kind of how the board falls.
Well, seeing as how we're talking some draft, let's switch gears. I know we're going to start. We got to start closing up here in just a little bit. I've got 2 prospect profiles, 1 offense, 1 defense. You call it where we start. Which one do you want to start with, John?
I'm an offensive guy. Let's go.
Okay. We'll go with offense first, then we'll go with the defensive player. Now, of course, I'm the resident West Coast guy, so obviously you're going to see these 2 players that I'm going to highlight here, and you're going to go, of course, the Pac-12 guy, blah, blah, blah. There's a rhyme and reason, John Sheeran, as to why these 2 players are being specifically profiled. For offense, this kid was recently mocked to the Cincinnati Bengals by ESPN's Todd McShay in his first-round mock, so we'll talk about him. The other I was asked about from good friend of the show, longtime Bengals friend via Twitter, Cody Toomey. He dabbles in draft talk and profiles and whatnot as well. And he obviously pointed that guy out to me. So we're going to talk about him in just a second. So without further ado, I may or may not rewind some of these because some of them have clips here. They're a little longer than the others that I had done in the past here. But here you go. The first one up is Mr. Dalton Kincaid, the tight end from Utah. Now, as you look at Dalton Kincaid here, I love this guy. Love this guy. There are things that traditional and draft gurus will not like, namely age. You look at 23 years old, currently will be 24 in October. He's a 5th-year senior, 6'4", 240, not absolutely huge, but tall. Guy catches everything, John, and he does a little bit of everything in terms of the types of catches he makes, whether it's deep down the field, contested catches, short routes. There are questions with him, but a lot of stuff here. Here's some of the stats: 107 total catches. Now he went to the University of San Diego previously, so these are the Utah stats here. I'm going to pause this real quick so you can see this. 107 receptions in his career, 3 years at Utah, 70 last year alone. 890 yards last year, 8 touchdowns both last year and the year prior. And you can see there 19 touchdowns and 1,209 yards in 2 years at the University of San Diego, smaller school there, where old Josh Johnson hailed. So he's a 5th-year guy. He is older. He was, I believe, a team captain for Utah. So that's a thing that I'm sure Zach Taylor and company would like. Just a guy who is effort, and a guy that you look here. This is just some kind of short plays, and watch this: 1 tackle, 2 tackles, and then runs through a 3rd. So, just high effort. And I could put these catches on display for a really long time here. You see here, hurdle, nice play there for a nice play, nice gain there. This one, I believe, is a down the field one. So showing the stretching of the field here, a little bit of a bobble and contested catch. So there's a lot of stuff here that, here's an intermediate route and he takes it, I think, into the end zone on this one. Yeah, he does. So a lot of stuff to like from this kid, with what he provides. Red zone target, again, 16 touchdowns the last 2 years for Utah. Obviously Utah, a big, couple of nice years, nice hurdle there. So I could go on with this, with the hurdles and all this stuff forever and ever and ever and ever. Right. I mean, this is everything that he does. The big question coming up here, and we'll have some clips on it, just a few. What's the blocking like, right? What are we getting as a blocker here? He coming out of the flat here, contested catch, boom, bobbles between defenders. So what are you getting here from him as a blocker? And that's kind of the big question. And maybe we'll fast forward that a little bit here to get to that. Oh, actually, you know what? I got to play these because this is against USC. These are some big catches coming up here. That's the big question with this kid, though, John, is, blocking. Can he hold up? Can he do everything you want him to do as an NFL tight end, traditional NFL tight end? Watch this one. Nice one down the seam there. Beautiful catch. And then there's one also, I think, that's going to come up here down the sideline, and it'll show some nice footwork, albeit just the 1 foot for college, but still incredible play. This is a tight end. I mean, this isn't a wide receiver, but he's acting like a tall wideout, right? So you can see here, here's the replay coming down. Foot comes down against USC. Boom. Got to like that. So I really like this kid from a pass catching perspective. There's some stuff in run block. Here he is as a run blocker. Right there, not much that you see there. He kind of dives into the pile, does create a little bit of a lane, helps to create a lane there. Excuse me, kind of does the same on this one here. So not, blocking, he'll get in there just because of his level of effort. I didn't love necessarily his blocking. I could see him potentially bulking up upper body, but he can make any catch that you ask him to make. He's a red zone weapon, which obviously is a hot commodity in today's NFL, lined up a little bit, a couple times H-back, particularly when blocking, a lot in the slot. Again, the high effort in blocking, but probably needs a little bit more work. The age is a question, but that also means he could be ready to contribute right now. I would like to see, he's a little bit thinner, but man, you can use this guy right away, John, as, just a weapon in the Bengals system and do some different things that really provide some spark for Joe Burrow and a guy that I think would be, again, the captain status brings character and other elements. I just really like this guy. Now, in terms of where he may go, I think McShay had him mocked to the Bengals at the end of the first round. I see him kind of going maybe more where Trey McBride went last year, which is like middle of the second, early middle second. So that's where I see him going, and a guy that I think, he's probably not going to be all-star, all-pro type of guy perennially, but I think he could fit into this offense and be a nice weapon, provided that the Bengals get good draft value where they pick him.
890 yards for a tight end is a lot, especially in an offense where I think Utah only had 3,500 passing yards. So that, signals that he was not just a feature of the offense, he was the feature of the passing offense. 70 receptions for tight end is crazy too. This is also the interesting thing about the draft, because I knew nothing about this young man before Anthony mentioned him to me and showed me his height, weight, production, highlights, and age specifically, and a lot of it sounds like Travis Kelce coming out of UC, because Kelce was also, I believe, a 24-year-old rookie. He did a lot of things at UC in terms of being a receiver. He lined up as an inline guy, as a slot guy, but obviously athleticism and just the ability as a pure receiver was his biggest billing coming out of college. Now, Travis, I think, missed time at UC because of some not so great things, which is why he, I think, missed a couple of seasons and why he entered the NFL late as like a 24-year-old rookie. But there is precedent for a tight end with that athletic upside, with that upside in terms of production, with that skill set at that age to eventually become something great. Now, obviously, Travis Kelce is a Hall of Famer. He's probably a first ballot at this point. Like, you don't expect that from Dalton Kincaid. But there, for the knocks that he may have in terms of his blocking ability, in terms of his age, it shouldn't deter. I would think it shouldn't deter teams from investing an early pick on him. And he just ultimately seems like a tight end that the Bengals haven't had in quite some time. A guy who can truly stretch the field, right? Hayden Hurst, we thought was going to be more of that, but he wasn't really utilized in that way in this offense. And if the Bengals want to add that extra dimension at that position, he certainly seems like he fits the bill.
I see a little bit of a blend between Tyler Eifert and Hayden Hurst in terms of, like, if you're looking at it from a Bengals perspective. I know that's kind of lofty because Eifert was a Pro Bowler. He was a guy that did not block. He kind of worked at it later in his career. He did not block. That's not what he was brought here for. Hurst did a little more of it. It definitely wasn't his forte either. But between when you see the effort, the breaking of the tackles, the hurdles, all that kind of stuff that Kincaid does, I saw a lot of that from Hayden Hurst this last year with the Bengals. And then, you look at the other stuff, the ability to stretch the field, the working the seam, that sort of thing. I see this guy as just, I really, really like this guy. I really do. The value has to be there. I'm really curious at how he tests also. Really curious about that. And I think also he missed, I believe, the Rose Bowl because he had an injury, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to double check that one. But so that's a knock there. But a guy who just did a lot of work for that Utah team and was a big reason for their success. So a guy that I'm very, very interested in. One of the things, ironically, when I talked about him being, what's his run blocking type of prowess like, oddly enough, some of the biggest gains came on these kind of delays or, this looked like an RPO type of play where they're going to go maybe to him. He runs a route, and then all of a sudden, things open up for the running back there. So a couple of big gainers came from that as a decoy, not necessarily as a blocker in a traditional run set. So I found that to be kind of interesting. Okay, so the other guy, I was asked specifically about this guy, and man, I hope I should get his name right. I hope I get it correct. This is the versatile and exciting defensive lineman, Tuli Pulotu. I think I said it right. Now this guy's fun, John, and why he's fun is because he makes plays from all over the defensive line. All over the defensive line. Can rush the passer from the inside, can rush the passer from the outside. High effort in the run game. I don't have necessarily as many questions for this guy in terms of talent. There are a couple of things, but 6'4", 290, really young. He's only 20 right now. Turns 21 by the time the season starts, early September. He's a true junior, whereas Kincaid was the redshirt senior. Played all over the defensive line. He's a Southern California guy. This guy had a monster season this year. He was all Pac-12 in 21, and then followed that up with a big year this year. You see here 116 total tackles, 46 of them in 2022. He had 21 sacks overall, 13 and a half last year, 5.5 the year prior. So a nice jump, which you like to see from a good sophomore year. 32 tackles for loss, 22 of them last year, John. 22 tackles for loss last year. 2 forced fumbles last year, 4 in total, 1 fumble recovery in his career, none last year, and then 3 passes defended last year, 5 in total in his career. So a productive guy. He had a good year in 2021 and then an outstanding year this year. So it's not so much the one-year wonder type of status with him. He's a guy that does some stuff. Here he is against the run, shoots off the edge, makes a big play for a loss. That's against Stanford. You can see here, this is what I love about this guy, John, is depending on the game, depending on the circumstance, he plays different areas. And you see that one was an interior play, I think, where he shoots for a loss here, shoots in there for a loss against the run. He can shed blocks really well. Look at that, comes off the edge. I think he came in untouched on that one, but just a guy that is disruptive. Wasn't even on the defensive line really right there. Here he is, sniffs the ball out on the perimeter and forces a fumble, beats a guy off the edge. And if you're noticing a trend here in terms of pass rushing, in terms of run blocking, you'll see on the pass rushing, it's both edge spots. It's on the inside. He just makes plays all over the field. Now, some of the things I didn't like was that, or I guess that people could find that they don't like about him, is they came in spurts against teams that were not, top caliber SEC type of teams. You're talking about your Washington States. You're talking about, a Stanford team that had a down year. You're talking about high production against teams that aren't necessarily, the hugest caliber. But when he goes up against these teams, he dominates them. And he finds ways to get to the quarterback. Sometimes he'll submarine to get either a tackle for loss on a quarterback. He'll kind of submarine a block and get under it, or he'll loop around the edge. You can see here a nice jump around the offensive tackle there. And then, another loop around there. I think that was San Jose State, if I'm not mistaken there. And then, of course, I think this is the last clip I have here against Notre Dame. So you can see here, he can rush the passer from multiple spots. The Bengals need interior pass rush. They need some extra juice potentially on the outside too. He has good pursuit and play recognition. I said the ascending player, 5.5 sacks last year, 13.5 this year. So a really nice jump. Can be versatile, which would be really, really good for Lou Anarumo. I don't know how, in terms of that huge, quick, fast first step, I don't know how explosive he is. Of course, you've got the question of, okay, where do you play him full time, or where do you play him the most in the NFL? Do you play him on the inside and kind of hope he's that Geno Atkins kind of guy in the middle? Or do you try and maybe shed a few pounds and let him be an edge rusher? Or do you just kind of keep working him the way that SC did if you feel that you're confident enough to get production out of him at the NFL level? Both of those ways. A guy that I really, really like. He's just, if you're Lou Anarumo, you can have a ton of fun with this guy, I think. And with the Bengals needing a ton of help on interior pass rush and just extra juice getting to the quarterback, this guy provides it from a lot of different spots.
22 tackles for loss and the next closest guy on his team had 7.5. That's not
the defense
normal.
was terrible. Yeah, the defense was terrible across the board. He was the lone bright spot.
Regardless of the circumstance, like, I mean, he's doing it at USC. It's not like he's doing it at an FCS school. And I understand, like, there were concerns with like Myles Garrett because he had like half of his sacks in his junior year against like a low level school, even though he still had like 8.5 on the year and still led the team. Like, production is production ultimately, and this is a rare kind of production. Like, this is Will Anderson type of production relative to his team. Now, obviously, Will Anderson's probably a better athlete, and he did it against SEC schools and everything and whatnot. But if this guy, like, if there are questions with his overall athleticism, and that's the reason why he drops, like, this type of player who produces at this age too, if he's only 20 years old,
20,
these are these are guys that stay in the NFL for a long time. Like, production like this isn't an accident at this level of competition in college football. So, like, you might be onto like a steal here.
What I love about the guy is, so many times in the past we talk about those hybrid edge linebackers. So there's a guy that used to play for SC. I don't know which team he was on. He was on Washington for a while. I think he was on the Chargers as well. And Cheno Wosu. He was a guy that a few years back that was a productive guy. That was that tweener, but the tweener between edge rusher and outside linebacker, right? This is a guy that's a tweener between interior defensive lineman and can play the outside. And so you either, you can, there's a little bit of, I don't know about the comparison. There's a little bit of Ed Oliver in there. This guy's bigger in terms of being able to do things inside. Maybe you kick him out. I really like this guy. I don't know. It's going to be very hard to tell where he could last. Someone could fall in love with him in the middle of the first round. He could slide to the back of the first round or second round if people don't love how he tests, if he tests poorly, that sort of thing. But I mean, you look at the tape, he's just everywhere. He's everywhere. And if he was not on that USC team, based on how poor the rest of that defense was, there is no way in hell that SC team was making it, as far as they did this year, because that defense wouldn't have been able to really stop anybody. But this guy was an absolute force with really no help around him.
Right. And I think it's going to depend on how he tests athletically, because that production with elite testing numbers, that doesn't last beyond like the first 15 picks in the draft. Now, There might be questions on like what his acumen is and, how technically sound he is as a pass rusher. And obviously the tweener questions come into play as well. Maybe some teams wouldn't be comfortable with whatever plan is in place because they don't really know who he is. So a player with that profile, if he happens to fall in day 2, I feel like that is the spot to take him, right? Because like Ed Oliver, he was a top 10 pick and he was billed as like the next best 3 technique, and he hasn't really developed into that. And part of his career trajectory now is because like he's looked kind of down because of when he was drafted. But if he happens to be drafted in like the 50s or 60s or whatever, because there's some questions, like the expectations with him won't be nearly as high, and I think that would be an ideal spot for him to develop and progress into a solid player.
One of the one things I did love about the USC's defense and what they did with Tuli this year is they basically found weak spots on the opposition's offensive line, and they said, you're gonna play edge this week. You're gonna play right edge. You're gonna play left edge. You're gonna play interior, and we're just gonna have you exploit, because you're easily our best player on defense. We're gonna exploit someone up front. That's the weak area that we think you can get in there, and he did it almost every single week. 13.5 sacks, 22 tackles for loss this last year. Incredible, and a guy that I think would be I think Lou Anarumo would have a lot of fun with a guy like that. So those are our 2 prospect profiles. I know everybody's going to go West Coast homer. Hey, I know those guys a little bit more. I watched those 2 guys, Dalton Kincaid and Tuli there. So, but still 2 guys I think that would be really, really good additions in one form or another for the Cincinnati Bengals, probably within the first 2 rounds, most definitely for both of them, I would say, unless something crazy unforeseen happens. But that's kicking off the prospect profiles for this year. We'll have more, as well as free agency profiles and other goodies, mock drafts. We gotta do mock drafts probably at some point too, John.
Don't say
yeah.
that.
Oh yeah. Let's drop the mic and get out of here. We're coming up against it. So what do you got for us, my friend?
I guess there was some minor Joe Burrow news. He's launching a pro women's volleyball team in Nebraska for, I believe, a league that's forming next year with Jason Derulo. And I want to shout out at Mike Suzek on Twitter, who came up with the perfect pun. Joe Son Barulo.
I like it. And you sang that. That was nice. I like that. I like that.
Love Derulo.
Yeah. I kind of said I did a little bit of a mic drop on the last episode I did where I was just kind of just saying thank you once again to the listeners and to hanging with us for years really on this show, labor of love, and we just we try and give you what you like, what we think you like, what we hope you like, and the fact that you guys hang with us on the live shows, the fact that you hang with us, after the fact, and download all the stuff and just show us a lot of support. Can't thank all of you enough because we've received a lot of support. We've tried to supply you all not just with shows that John and I provide, but with others, and we're going to continue to do that from high quality people, and hopefully you just enjoy what we do. But I'm just grateful, John. And another season goes by. It was a successful Bengals season, a successful season for our channel, our website, and this specific podcast. We talked to a lot of cool people again, and it's a fun thing that we like to do. I appreciate your contributions as always, John, and just I'm just appreciative to the listeners. I can't echo that enough.
Absolutely, man. 6.1K on YouTube, strong and still growing. It amazed me every time I look at that number. So thank you guys.
Yeah, I probably should be better at this sort of thing. I don't know. But anyway, about promotion, I'm not a good promotion guy. I should be better about that, or I need to get someone in on that. But regardless, thank you all for everything. Thank you, John, and we will be back soon with more. Take care, and we'll see you soon.